Eleanor stood by the window, gazing out at the bustling city below. Boston was as vibrant as ever, but the weight of what she was about to do felt suffocating. The glass of the office felt more like a barrier than a window, trapping her in a place she wasn't sure she wanted to be. She could hear Michael's voice behind her, but her thoughts were elsewhere. "How long do we have?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. James Harrison, the lawyer who had become both an ally and an enigma in this tangled web, spread several papers across his mahogany desk. His fingers paused over a list of names, his eyes flicking up to meet hers. Directly 30 people. Indirectly hundreds. The list felt like a death sentence, an unavoidable disaster that could tear lives apart. Each name represented someone who would be impacted if Eleanor chose to go through with their plan, to expose the Mitchell family's long-standing fraud. Children, beneficiaries of trust funds that would collapse if the scheme was brought to light. They were innocent, and that made her question everything. Eleanor's gaze moved to the sheet of paper in front of her, but her mind wandered back to the story her father had never told her. William had always been the strong, silent type, the one who shielded her from the ugly truth of their family's dealings. But now, with him gone, his accidental death a strange, unexplained tragedy, she had to face the reality that he had been deep into this mess. And Laura, his wife, was at the heart of it all. Does it matter? Michael's voice interrupted her thoughts. We can prove the fraud. But the real question is, should we? James leaned back in his chair, tapping the list of names. Some of these funds are funding medical care education. We're talking about dismantling a multi-generational scheme. The words hung in the air, a reminder of how deeply entrenched the Mitchells were in corruption. Eleanor's father had tried to fix it. That's why he had been targeted. The hunting accident that had claimed his life? It wasn't an accident. He had been too close to exposing the family's darkest secrets. Stop. Eleanor's voice was sharp as she turned to face them, her hand gripping the back of the chair, knuckles white. There has to be another way. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, glancing at the screen. Megan. Her stomach twisted. Megan Grace had been digging into the Mitchell family's secrets for months. Eleanor had no idea what she was about to find, but it felt like the last piece of the puzzle was finally falling into place. Megan had found the missing property documents. She was about to confront Laura. Grace is calling Laura today, Eleanor murmured, her mind racing. Michael leaned in, his eyes narrowing. If Grace confronts Laura directly, it's over. The whole plan falls apart. Eleanor's phone buzzed again, and she glanced at the screen. The urgency in Megan's messages was undeniable. Time was running out. I need more time, Eleanor said, her voice filled with uncertainty. James, ever the pragmatist, shook his head. You don't have it. If Grace confronts Laura, the truth comes out. It's too late to back out now. Eleanor's hand trembled as she tucked the phone back into her pocket, still reeling from the implications. The stakes were too high. She didn't want to destroy lives, but the truth had to come out. Suddenly, the door to the office burst open. Eleanor turned, heart racing. There she was. Laura Mitchell, impeccable as ever, stood in the doorway. Her eyes were wild with a mix of anger and something else, fear. I should have known you'd run to Michael, Laura said, her voice low and cold. How did you find out? James stood up, his posture defensive. My daughter works in your building. Did Eleanor tell you that? Laura's gaze turned icy, and Eleanor's blood ran cold. How many families is she willing to destroy for her revenge? Laura spat, her voice thick with bitterness. The words hit Eleanor like a slap. She had been trying to do the right thing, but Laura's words stung. She wasn't sure who she was anymore, just a puppet caught in the crossfire of a decades-old scheme. Michael stepped in between them, but Laura's focus remained on Eleanor. You think you're protecting people? William thought the same thing. Look where that got him. Eleanor's heart clenched as her hands gripped the chair tighter, her breath caught in her throat. What did you just say? Laura's smile was a razor-sharp edge. William didn't just discover our schemes, Eleanor. He tried to fix them. He tried to funnel money into a safe place for the beneficiaries. Just like you're trying to do. And you stopped him. The realization hit like a hammer. The The pieces clicked together, and she knew, she had always known, the hunting accident was never an accident. It had been orchestrated. Why? Eleanor's voice was a whisper. Why would you stop him? Because, Laura said, moving closer, some structures can't be dismantled without destroying everything they support. You're not just fighting me, Eleanor. You're fighting generations of carefully balanced arrangements. Eleanor's mind raced. She couldn't deny it. Her father had tried to fix things, but at what cost? Had it been worth it? Laura's smile turned bitter as she moved even closer, her voice a whisper. Did Ryan tell you why he married you? Your family's political connections. 3 generations of judges and prosecutors. The perfect shield. Eleanor's stomach churned. This was bigger than she had ever imagined. It was more than just her family. It was about the entire balance of power in the city, the financial world, and everything they had built on lies. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it was Megan's name on the screen. The final pieces were falling into place. Take the call, Laura said softly, almost taunting her. Listen to Grace. Watch as another family shatters. The finality of her words hung in the air like a noose around Eleanor's neck. She had to decide now. The truth, or the mercy that Laura was offering in exchange for silence. The Mitchell family estate was a fortress of opulence, a sprawling mansion nestled on the outskirts of Boston. Tonight, the estate was alive with laughter, clinking glasses, and soft jazz floating through the air. The entire family had gathered to celebrate the anniversary of Laura and her husband, Ryan's father, Charles Mitchell. The perfect setting, Eleanor thought bitterly, for a grand illusion. It was a masquerade ball, and the world they all had built would come crashing down under the weight of truth. Eleanor, Michael, and Megan had infiltrated the event under the guise of invited guests, their cover story impeccable. But beneath the surface, they were gathering their weapons for the final act. The evidence they had collected over months, documents, recordings, and photographs, were hidden in their pockets, ready to be unleashed. Eleanor moved through the crowd, her heart hammering in her chest. She had never wanted to be here, but there was no choice. This was the moment she had been waiting for, and it would either make or break her. She had worked so hard to get to this point, to expose the truth that had been buried for so long. But as she looked around, she saw the faces of people she had once called family, people who had been manipulated just like her. Ready? Michael's voice cut through her thoughts. His face was calm, but Eleanor could see the tension in his jaw. She nodded. Let's do this. The room quieted as Eleanor approached the center, every step feeling like a beat of a drum, echoing louder in her mind. She took a deep breath and addressed the room. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice steady but sharp. I'm here tonight to tell you the truth about your legacy, the truth about the Mitchell family, and the truth about my father's untold actions. The room shifted uneasily. A few murmurs rose from the crowd, but they were quickly silenced. Eleanor could feel the eyes of the room on her, a sea of judgment and suspicion. William, my father, Eleanor continued, wasn't just a victim of a tragic accident. He was murdered, and I have the documents to prove it. The room was silent now. Everyone was listening, every eye locked on Eleanor. She reached into her purse and pulled out the first piece of evidence, a photograph of her father's supposed accidental death certificate. But this was different. It was a forgery, signed off by Laura Mitchell. Gasps filled the air. The tension in the room was palpable, but Eleanor was only getting started. Everything you thought you knew about your wealth, your legacy, has been built on lies. Fraud. Manipulation. I've spent months gathering evidence, years of corruption, all linked to this family. And now, it's time for the truth to come out. She paused, scanning the room for the faces she knew best, her stepmother, Laura, Ryan, her half-brother, who was so deeply involved in the web of deceit, and Charles, her stepfather, the man who had never seen her as anything but a pawn in their game. Ryan's face had gone pale, and his eyes flickered between Eleanor and the documents she held. His hands trembled ever so slightly, and for a moment, Eleanor saw the guilt in his eyes. She had expected him to be the enemy, the one who defended the lie with everything he had. But what she saw in him wasn't just complicity. It was confusion, regret, and perhaps even fear. Why? Ryan finally asked, his voice hoarse. Why are you doing this? Eleanor's gaze hardened. Because the truth is more important than your family's lies. My father tried to expose you, Ryan. He knew. He knew what you were all hiding. Ryan's eyes dropped to the floor, his shoulders sagging with the weight of his mother's secrets. Eleanor could see that the guilt was eating him alive. He wasn't the villain she had always believed him to be. But that didn't change the truth. Without a word, she reached for the final document, William's suicide note. Her fingers hovered over the paper, and she let the room absorb the gravity of what she was about to reveal. But just as she was about to hold it up for all to see, a voice broke through the silence.
Stop.
It was Laura, standing in the doorway, her face ashen and set in stone. She was no longer the elegant woman who had charmed her way into their family. In that moment, she was just a woman whose carefully constructed world was crumbling. Eleanor, Laura began, her voice laced with venom. You think this is the answer? You think this will bring your father back? You're just as guilty as we are. Eleanor took a deep breath, steadying herself. I'm not guilty of anything but wanting the truth. Laura's lips curled into a bitter smile. Truth? You want to expose everything?
Fine.
But I'll tell you something you don't know. Your father wasn't the man you thought he was. He was no hero. He was part of this, just like the rest of us. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't flinch.
No.
You twisted him. You manipulated him. He was trying to save us from you. Laura's eyes flashed with anger. And you think you're any better than me? You think that burning everything down is going to make you a hero? You're no better than the rest of us, Eleanor. Your revenge won't fix what's broken. But Eleanor wasn't listening. She had made up her mind.
No.
It ends here. In one swift motion, she tossed the documents into the air, watching them flutter and burn in the flames of the fireplace. The room gasped as the evidence they had worked so hard to gather turned to ash. Eleanor, Michael shouted, but she raised a hand to silence him. I'm done with revenge, she said softly. I won't destroy innocent lives just to prove a point. The alarms began to blare, the fire detectors triggered by the flames, and chaos erupted in the room. People scrambled, the panic spreading like wildfire. But Eleanor stood still, calm in the storm she had created. What they didn't know was that the evidence she had burned was a decoy. The real documents, the ones that could bring Laura down, were already in the hands of the FBI. The fire alarms were nothing more than a distraction. As the room descended into chaos, Eleanor watched as Grace, her ally, stepped into the room. Behind her were federal agents, their presence unmistakable. We have everything, Grace said, her voice firm and unyielding. She turned to face Laura, who stood frozen in disbelief. You're under arrest for the murder of William Mitchell, for fraud, and for your role in the corruption of the Mitchell family. The room went silent as Grace's words sunk in. Laura's face twisted in fury and fear as she realized the truth was no longer hers to control. The empire she had built on lies was crumbling before her eyes. As Grace approached her, Eleanor stood in the background, watching as the woman who had tormented her for years was finally brought to justice. But even as the family's empire of lies collapsed, Eleanor didn't feel the satisfaction of revenge. She felt something different, peace. Laura was led away, and the guests, now shaken and scared, began to filter out. The Mitchell family was no more. Eleanor walked out onto the balcony, breathing in the cold night air. She could feel the weight lifting off her shoulders. The past was gone, but the future was hers to shape. For the first time in a long while, she felt free. The cold night air felt almost like a rebirth for Eleanor. Standing on the balcony of the Mitchell family estate, the weight of the evening's events slowly began to settle into her bones. The chaos inside was still unfolding, sirens, agents flooding the rooms, and the hushed whispers of a family in complete disarray. But Eleanor remained calm, her heart no longer burdened by the weight of revenge or the endless cycle of deceit she had been trapped in for years. Her hand gripped the railing, and she looked out over the sprawling estate. The mansion, which had once symbolized power, control, and wealth, now seemed empty, its dark windows reflecting nothing but the ghosts of a broken legacy. For so long, this place had been the epicenter of her pain, a constant reminder of her stepmother's manipulation and her father's death. But now, for the first time in years, Eleanor felt a sense of clarity, as if the fog of hatred and fear had finally lifted. Behind her, the sound of footsteps broke the silence. She didn't have to turn to know it was Michael. He had always been her rock through all the chaos, her one true ally in a world full of betrayal. "You did it," Michael said, his voice softer than usual, but with pride threading through it. "You made the right choice." Eleanor turned to face him, her eyes a little softer now, the sharp edges of her anger dulled by the night's events. "I had to, Michael. I couldn't let it keep going. I couldn't be the person who destroyed everything." He stepped closer, his gaze intense, yet understanding. "You saved so many people tonight, Eleanor. Not just from Laura and her lies, but from becoming something darker than who you are." Eleanor nodded, her fingers curling around the cold metal of the balcony. She knew he was right. In the heat of the moment, it had felt like she was giving up on justice, on taking everything Laura and the Mitchell family had stolen from her. But as the evidence burned, she realized that the truth wasn't something that could be forced into the open through destruction. It was something that would eventually rise on its own, like a tide that couldn't be stopped. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, the question lingering between them. Michael's face softened, and he glanced back into the house. "Now, we wait. Grace and the agents will handle the rest. Laura's done. Ryan, too. He'll have to face the consequences of everything he's done, but maybe he'll find a way out of this. You've given him a chance, Eleanor. You've given all of us a chance to rebuild." She wasn't sure if she believed him about Ryan. Her half-brother had always been caught in the web of the Mitchell family's control, his choices limited by the legacy of lies and manipulation. But Eleanor knew there was still something redeemable in him, something that hadn't fully been corrupted by his mother's influence. Whether or not he would ever escape his mother's shadow was up to him. But for now, that was beyond her control. "How did you know it was the right moment to burn the evidence?" Michael asked, curiosity edging his tone. Eleanor sighed, turning her gaze back to the estate. "It wasn't about timing, Michael. It was about knowing that the evidence, however powerful, wasn't the endgame. It was the catalyst, but I wanted something more than just taking Laura down. I wanted to change the system. I wanted to take back the control that was stolen from us." Michael smiled. "You've always had a way of thinking ahead. I think you've done exactly that." They stood in silence for a moment, both of them lost in their thoughts. The Mitchell family, the estate, the tangled web of deceit, it was all slowly unraveling. But Eleanor had learned one thing through it all. No matter how deep the lies ran, the truth was always stronger. It was just a matter of time before it came to light, and tonight had been the final push. The quiet was broken by the distant sound of footsteps approaching from inside. Grace emerged, her expression grave but resolute. Behind her were two federal agents, their presence unmistakable. They walked towards Eleanor and Michael with purpose, and for the first time that night, the air felt thick with finality. "Eleanor," Grace said, her tone serious but filled with appreciation. "You did it. You set everything in motion, and now we've got everything we need." Eleanor's chest tightened. It was over. The Mitchell family's empire, built on years of lies and corruption, was finally coming to an end. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with exhaustion. "We'll handle the legal side," Grace assured her. "The FBI will start their investigations into the rest of the family, Charles, Ryan, and anyone else connected to Laura's scheme. Your actions tonight have turned the tide, Eleanor. The Mitchells won't be able to hide anymore." Eleanor nodded, her mind racing through the possibilities. She couldn't help but feel a sense of relief, even though it was tinged with sadness. She had lost so much of her life to this family, to these lies. But tonight, she had gained something she had never expected to find: peace. Grace placed a hand on her shoulder. I know this wasn't easy for you, but you did what was necessary. You've changed the course of history for this family. You've given everyone, yourself included, a chance to move forward. For the first time in a long while, Eleanor felt the weight of her decisions settling into her chest. The battle wasn't over yet. The Mitchell family was done, but the real work was just beginning. She had to rebuild her life, her future, and everything she had lost along the way. But she wasn't alone anymore. She had Michael. She had Grace. And, in a way, she had finally reclaimed her own sense of self-worth. I couldn't have done this without you, Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. You didn't have to, Michael replied with a gentle smile. You've always had it in you. The night stretched on, the last remnants of the chaos slowly fading away. The Mitchell family estate, once a symbol of corruption and control, was now empty, its halls silent, its future uncertain. But for Eleanor, the silence was a welcome change. She had chosen mercy over justice, and in doing so, she had given herself the freedom to walk away from the past and into a future built on honesty, strength, and a chance for redemption.